Hey guys, this is Bharadwaj with phonearena.com and this is the Samsung Galaxy K Zoom that I have here. So we recently unboxed it and we had been going through the games and the benchmarks and stuff, but this video is about the camera. The camera on the back is upgraded. It's a 20.7 megapixel camera from the 16 megapixels of the predecessor, and as you can see it's a lot slimmer and thinner, so it's much easier to handle, making it a much better user experience than before. But it still has the optical image stabilization, the xenon flash and everything else. So we're going to take a look at the camera performance and give you a verdict on how the whole user experience of the camera is on the Galaxy K Zoom. So let's go ahead into the camera review of the Galaxy K Zoom. So let's start with the specifics here, the lens, the sensor and everything. So first up, the sensor is a 1 by 2.3 inch type 20.7 megapixel CMOS sensor. So this is an upgrade from the 16 megapixels in terms of megapixels, but if you consider the actual pixel size, that's actually lesser on the K Zoom, because the 1 by 2.3 inch sensor on the S4 Zoom accommodated just 16 megapixels, but this time it's 20.7 megapixels, making the pixel size a little bit lesser. But otherwise, you have a very tightly packed lens. You can see that the lens unit is very thin and slim, and it has the focal length of 4.4 to 44 millimeters. That's the actual focal length, and the 24 mm equivalent is of course 24 mm to 240 mm, which is 10x in terms of zoom. And the aperture range is exactly the same as before, which is 3.1 at the minimum zoom and 6.3 at the maximum zoom. So that's the different aperture values, and the aperture values are the same, but that's slightly different focal length values for this lens. It was 4.3 to 43 mm on the S4 Zoom. So apart from that, you also have the xenon flash. The xenon flash is as good as the S4 Zoom. We'll show you the samples later. And then there is the LED focus assist, and of course the speakers here. The lens also has the optical image stabilization unit, which is also pretty good. And you can see that the grip this time is not plastic, but the perforated bag that debuted on the Galaxy S5. So moving back to the front here, we have to see what exactly the changes are in terms of the user interface. So at first instant, you can see that it's pretty much the same as the Galaxy S5. The camera has all the features as the Galaxy S5 and also has a bit more, but also has a bit less. So let's explore the interface first. Over at the right, you can see that 236 is the number of images I can take with the remaining storage on the phone, and then there is the shutter buttons for the video and the camera shutter still. Mode is of course the mode selection menu, which can be triggered from list or a grid. So going into the grid, you can see that there are, let's click there again. Alright, so yeah, so this is the primary grid interface. That's much easier to see. You can see there are already pre-selected modes, but there are tons and tons of modes available already. We don't think everything is useful, but some are new, and we're going to show you that. So some things new are actually basically pro suggest. So this is something that Instagrammers would really like. So if you click on the image, it will suggest some kinds of filters which you can use. For example, it knows that it's halogen light, so I just tap it, and then also you can have tap and hold for focus or exposure locks. So there you go. So those are the two boxes that you can use for exposure. So exposure is now separate. You can see the exposure changing, and then of course the focus too you can change by dragging around the thing. So going back into the normal thing, this is the Pro Suggest mode that I was talking about, and then of course you have other modes, including all these things that were already there on the Galaxy S5 and the S4 Zoom. So a lot of these things are pretty much self-explanatory. Program is of course where you can just change the ISO and the exposure compensation. That's the program mode, and there is also a manual mode, which is obviously much better if you can take complete control of the camera. So this is basically a point and shoot camera, so you can control a lot of things. You can see that adjust the exposure by manually setting the shutter speed and the aperture value. So you can change the aperture and the shutter speed, but you cannot change the focus. Before, you could change the focus and zoom by rotating the ring, but the focus is completely auto in this. So these are the changes that you can do with the aperture. There is no fancy manual mode that was on the Galaxy camera on the S4 zoom, but this time it's like completely different because this is the new TouchWiz. And then over at the left, you have the front-facing camera, which is 2 megapixels and actually works pretty well. But it's a small sensor. Don't expect much in terms of dynamic range. And then you have the flash, which is obviously the xenon flash, which I can show you in a bit. So this is the effect of the xenon flash. The xenon flash does freeze the moment, and that's the whole thing that it's built for. So it can freeze the moment in low light, and of course can take really bright pictures in low light. So here in the settings, you can see when it's manual, you have the dial like interface that you can change the shutter speed, the aperture and the ISO, and you also have the other things like, for example, the white balance, which is of course including the K value that you can change. So the K value can be changed if you click on the right button here, which is very good for people who want to completely control the white balance. So that's one good thing about a point and shoot camera on a phone. And then also you have the optical image stabilization, the photo suggest, the multi-motion is the slow motion feature, and of course movie is 30 and 60 fps for videos. And then you have many things like wind cut, which will cut the winds on the mic. And then you have the sound, which is quiet, zoom, normal or mute. So this is how it works, all the settings and everything. And you also have some extra features like camera function volume, which is the sound that it gives. And then you have the auto close camera and everything. And also you have options for digital zoom, which is extending beyond the optical zoom that the phone can do. And also you can set the start mode to be from the last memory. So that's the settings part of the Galaxy K Zoom. So let's talk about the performance now. That's what really matters in the camera phone department. So we did take it for a spin in several lighting conditions as usual. So first up, here are some samples in broad daylight, which is the most normal use case that you find. So here you go, these are the samples. And as you saw from the samples, all the photos came out really, really well. This has a 1 by 2.3 inch 20.7 megapixel sensor, so it's pretty big, and the lens itself is really good. So this is at the zero zoom position. You can see everything folds in when I close up, and see the lens itself is very clear, and what you would expect from a point and shoot camera is possible on this phone. So it is a point and shoot camera and lens, and in that way it works really well. So daylight pictures are brilliant, the details are very good, and the colors are spot on. And if you can't have the right colors, you can always choose custom white balance and change it. So that's how it works. So daylight pictures, yes. And if you ask about the zoom, thankfully much better than the S4 zoom is the fact that it can now zoom with the volume rocker. So that's one really good thing that we like, because last time the volume rocker did just function for the volume, which was kind of stupid on the S4 zoom. This is pretty much the thing that we wanted, and Samsung has implemented it on the K zoom. And there is also the pinch to zoom, which also works, but it's not that effective, I guess. So yes, that's the zoom factor, but we did have some really good shots from 10x zoom photos. We could zoom in really, really close, and here are some 0x and 10x samples that of the same scene, standing in the same position, I could use the lens and extract a lot out of the photo. So here you go, these are the samples. And now moving on to macro. Macro is something the K Zoom excels in, because the S4 zoom already was very good and the K zoom is actually much better. It can go really close in terms of macro, and you can see some of the shots here that we took up at really close distances. So here are the macro samples. Well, as you saw, the macro samples were indeed very nice in terms of detail and, of course, color as expected. The wonderful bokeh that you get when you go close is something that you don't get with normal camera phones. This is because of the lens, just not the aperture, because it's 3.1 at the minimum, but still it has a really good bokeh because the distance between the lens and the camera sensor is pretty high, and the focal length, as you saw, is like 4.4 millimeters, which provides good depth of field. So macro shots are very good on the K zoom. Now moving on to other things like HDR, for example, you could have seen the rich tone HDR mode that we had. This HDR mode is very normal in the sense that it doesn't have extra colors or anything, but it is very hard to take non-shaky pictures with the HDR mode. That's pretty clear, because you can see that the photo has indeed come really well. The saturation is a bit high rather than the normal thing, but it's not too high or too artificial. It's very natural, and the HDR mode is actually very good in terms of dynamic range. But we noticed that even the normal mode is very good for dynamic range. You would have seen the normal daylight shots. Some shots have extremely good dynamic range that is without HDR, so we don't really see the need for HDR. But if you're into HDR photos, then this should work good, but make sure that you have steady hands, because it's easily accepting shake. So that's the HDR mode. And then of course we have the low light shots. Now we have a lot of things to talk about this, so anyway, let's take a look at the samples first. The samples are okay because I took them in manual. If I had taken them in auto, which some photos I did, it would have turned out much different. Because most of the times I was met with shake. As I said, with the HDR mode, most of the times it's shaky. But if you can master the manual mode, if you can like control the exposure the way you want it, then obviously you can take great pictures in low light too. So it's not the best when it comes to low light. It's not even as good as the not even the S5. Like let's say, like for example, the Nokia Lumia 1020. That's the direct competition that the Samsung Galaxy K Zoom has. That has definitely better low light pictures than the K Zoom. But when it comes to detail and good performance in manual, if you can control it, then obviously you can go for the K Zoom, because it does good low light. Not the best, not the most usable, but it does good low light, like a point and shoot camera it does. So that's how the low light performance is of the K Zoom. Now moving on to video, you can see that the video mode has a lot of modes and a lot of options basically, and one of them is of course 1080p 60 fps. Thanks to YouTube supporting 60 fps, we have uploaded a separate sample, but even then in this video you can take a look at the 60 fps sample with 10x zoom in action. So take a look. And as you saw, the video sample was actually brilliant when it comes to zoom, because I've never been able to zoom in video as clear as this phone in any other camera. So that's how good the video mode is, and it's also very good in terms of optical image stabilization and also the mics. So the whole package seems very impressive in terms of stills as well as video, and our verdict is that it's slightly better than the S4 zoom, definitely. And the low light, while not the best, is still usable. So if you're looking to compromise on the thickness and are still okay with the camera performance of this, if you want great daylight pictures, if you want great night shots with xenon flash, that's something really good. Also, if you consider you like photos with flash, I don't usually take photos with flash, but if you like taking photos with flash, then this has a xenon flash, which is much better than LED. And then of course, if you can completely compromise on the size and the thickness, which is abnormal for a phone but is very good for a camera phone, this is almost possibly as good as the 1020. So that's the Samsung Galaxy K Zoom, and our verdict is that it has a really nice camera. But what about the phone? What about the overall performance and everything? So that you can check out in our full review, which will be coming up in some days. So stay tuned for that. Do hit the like button if you like this video. If you want more videos like these, subscribe to us, and thanks for watching. Do let us know what you think in the comment section below.